X is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. X is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. X is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a.
That is our introduction to solving quadratic equations by using the quadratic formula. We have talked about the first two of the three algebraic methods that can be used to solve a quadratic equation. So we talked about factoring, and factoring works really, really well if the quadratic equation can be factored. If it can't be factored, then we have to find another method. Well, completing the square also works very, very well for all quadratic equations if your a equals 1 and maybe that your b is even, because that really helps. When you have to do that b divided by 2, it helps that the b is even, so we come out with a nice number. Okay? The process becomes very difficult when a is greater than 1 and lots of fractions are involved. So while completing the square works for every single quadratic function, it's not always easy for every single quadratic function. The quadratic formula is what we are going to talk about today, and it works for all quadratic equations all the time, no matter what. And if you prefer to use this method for every single time, that's fine. You can use this method every time. However, I want you to know, if you use this method and you come out with a integer answer or a fraction answer with no radical left in your answer, that means that quadratic function could have been factored. Just keep that in mind. So let's talk a little bit about the quadratic formula. I will probably stop and let you watch the video one more time because you're going to need to memorize it.
X is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a.
Okay, now that you've seen the video again, we're going to solve each equation by using the quadratic formula, round to the nearest tenth. We're going to mark that out because we're going to leave our radical in there. So again, it's very, very important that the quadratic equation equals 0. You have to have it equal 0. It must, because that is how you find the correct values of A, B, and C. So number 1 equals 0. Check. We're good. Identify our A. Well, in this case, our A is 1. Our B is -1. And our C is -20. It's very, very important that you get the correct signs. And yes, you may be able to see that that can be factored. Let's not factor it. I want you guys to start saying this as the opposite of B. If you will tell yourself the opposite of B, just like we were doing when we did opposite of B over 2A, when we were graphing, notice opposite of B and 2A are in our quadratic formula. They are there. When we were graphing, we did the opposite of B over 2A. Well, let's say it that way again. So the opposite of B would be +1. Plus or minus, what that means right there, of course, we're going to leave that plus or minus because when you take a square root, you have two solutions, the principal square root or positive square root and the negative square root. So we're going to leave that there. And then we're going to say b squared. Well, in this case, b squared is -1 squared. I want to tell you right here, when you guys, I know you're going to use calculators for this, and I am fine with that. If you want to just always put the positive b, whatever b is, if you want to just put 1 in there, or if your b is -4, just put 4 in there, I am fine with that because I'm going to tell you, no matter what your value of b is, b squared will always be positive. Always, always, always. I don't care if you square a negative number or a positive number. This value right here has to always come out positive. And the biggest mistake I find students making is that right there. They will not put this in the calculator correctly. Okay, and then minus 4 times A times C. Okay, now I want you to kind of think of this as, I have the best way to explain it. So we have our B squared, okay? I want you to think of it as negative 4 times A times C, parentheses. I want you to think of it like that. That's my other big mistake that kids tend to make. So I'm going to work through those, and I want you to kind of pay attention to what happens, okay? So, and then that's all over 2 times A, which in this case is just 2. So this part's easy. What happens under the radical is this. Negative 1 squared becomes positive 1. Now, we're done with that. I want you to think of negative 4 times 1 is negative 4. And then negative 4 times negative 20 is positive 80. Okay? So that's why I wanted you to think of it like b squared plus a negative 4 times A times C. It's almost critical that you look at it like that. And then you multiply those three numbers together. Sometimes it'll come out negative, sometimes it'll come out positive. But I want you to look at it that way. All over 2. So we end up with 1 plus or minus the square root of 81 all over 2. Well, 81 is a nice perfect square, so we're going to end up with 1 plus 9. So I wrote that really backwards. 1 plus 9, because the square root of 81 is 9, or 1 minus 9. Okay, so 1 plus 9 is 10, and 10 over 2 is 5, and 1 minus 9 is negative 8, and negative 8 divided by 2 is negative 4. So while that's a lot of work, and factoring in that case, in my opinion, factoring would have been much, much easier, because notice we came out with answers with no radicals, 4 and 5, and we could have factored that up here. We could have seen that 4 and 5. So our answers are positive 5 and negative 4. So you can always use quadratic formula, but you don't have to. You can factor if you want to. So let's look at this next problem. What do we notice first? We do not have a 0. So we're going to have to add 1 to both sides, and we get x squared plus 4x plus 1 equals 0. Now we're good to go. Our A is 1, our B is 4, our C is also 1. I can look at that and tell immediately I cannot factor that. This quadratic is going to have to use the quadratic formula, and it's going to come out with a radical in our answer, and that's okay. So let's use our quadratic formula. X equals the opposite of b, so negative 4, plus or minus the square root. I can go ahead and square my b if I wanted to. If I look at this and I go b squared, okay, I know that 4 squared is 16. I could go ahead and put that in there if I wanted to. Minus 4 times a times c. Well, this one's going to be pretty easy. And I get, oh, I can't forget my 2a, all over 2 times a, which is just going to be 2 again. So I'm going to go ahead and simplify this down here. Negative 4 plus or minus. Well, negative 4 times 1 times 1. I'm going to do a little simplification over here. 16, negative 4 times 1 is just minus 4. So 16 minus 4 is the square root of 12 all over 2. Well, 12 is not a perfect square, but in the calculator, it will simplify. I'm just going to tell you, just to remind you, that the square root of 12 is equal to the square root of 4 times 3, because 4 times 3 is 12, which is equal to the square root of 4 times the square root of 3. You guys, put this in your calculator. I'm just showing you how the calculator gets that. If you do the square root of 12, you will get 2 square roots of 3, and that is why. So here is how we can solve or simplify this. I'm going to keep it easy for you. 2 square roots of 3 all over 2. Now, I want you to focus on this and this and this. All three of those are even. All three of those can be divided by 2. Since all three parts can be divided by 2, I can simplify. Basically I'm dividing both terms by 2. -4 divided by 2 and the 2 square roots of 3 divided by 2. I can't do anything ever to what's under the radical. It's protected. Can't do it. Okay, but I can simplify this to -2 plus or minus, because -4 divided by 2 is -2, plus or minus the square root of 3. Those are my two solutions, because I have -2 plus the square root of 3 and -2 minus the square root of 3. I'm not going to make you find decimals and round to the nearest tenth. We're going to just leave it easy like that. That's actually a little bit easier, in my opinion. Maybe it's not. The calculator will do it for you. Okay, we're going to do one more, and then I'm going to end this video and let you go. Again, 0. We don't have a 0. Got to get it to 0. So we're going to add 5x to both sides. Where should that 5x go? I have a lot of students that want to do this. Why is that wrong? That is not right. We have to have the x in the middle and the 4 on the end. So we end up with 2x squared plus 5x plus 4 equals 0. So my A is 2, my B is 5, my C is 4. All of those numbers are positive. So let's switch now to our quadratic formula. The opposite of B, plus or minus. I'm going to go ahead and square B again. B squared is 25. If you are not listening to the video, I'm just showing you. I'm doing the math ahead of time. Minus 4 times A times C. So if I have -4 times 2 times 4, it's going to be a negative number, just so you know. And then 2 times 4. Oh, guess what? I get to move this thing one more time. Let's move it over here because we're not going to be using it. So let's see here. I get x equals -5 plus or minus. Well, I get 25. -4 times 2 is -8. And -8 times 4 is -32. All over 2 times 4, which is 8. Okay. Continuing on, I'm going to bring this right up here. X equals -5 plus or minus. If I simplify that, I get -7. You guys know what to do with the -7, so my final answer is -5 plus or minus I square roots of 7 divided by 8. Done. All I had to do is take out that -1. Remember, this is -1 times 7. So I take out that square root of -1 and make it become an I. All right. Good luck on your Delta math.